It's been said before that some things just feel right. Maybe that's the best way to say it. Because that's how I felt after I got off this great conversation with Rii Abrego and Joe Whitt. We talked about the Sprite and the Gardner, friendships, characters, and so many great things that when it came time to record this video, the only shirt that felt right was this one. I know it's not anything to do with Sprite and the Gardner, it's a Deadpool shirt. But it's comfy, it's soft, it's bright and cheerful, and it makes me smile. And hopefully, this conversation with Rii Abrego and Joe Whitt will do the same for you. Thanks for checking it out. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Storytelling with Seth. My name is Seth Singleton, I'm your host, and I am the lucky one who gets to sit down with Joe Whitt and Rii Abrego. And we're here to talk about the Sprite and the Gardner. And this is a story that I think when you're done hearing about it, you are going to be thankful and grateful and probably going to bother me about where you can find it, which I guarantee by the end of the show, these fine folks are going to let you know. Really quick, let me go ahead and introduce first Rii Abrego. Rii, how are you today?
I'm doing good.
Wonderful. Thanks for being on. I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to talking about your book. And Joe Whitt. Joe, how are you, sir?
Oh yeah, doing good.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much for coming on. I'm always thankful when Oni Press sends me a heads up about a really great book, and I loved reading yours. I love the story and the characters, and I was wondering if you could each give me, in your words, what the story is to kind of set it up for everybody listening, and then we can move into some, I'm hoping, really fun questions. Rii, can I start with you?
Sure.
How would you describe Sprite and the Gardener?
Sprite and the Gardner it follows this sprite named Wisteria. She's kind of new to the area, and she's not really doing so well clicking with the others. And she ends up becoming interested in this gardener who also lives in the town. And so she sort of learns more about the area through this, but also about um, this gardening ability that has been lost to time to the sprites.
And then Joe, would you phrase it in the same terms? Would there be anything else that you would add to that description to
I mean, I
further the
think
story in any way?
yeah, I think Ree pretty much summed it all up. I mean, I guess I'd like to add that The Sprite and the Gardener is a story about connecting with people. I think just like on a grander scale, I guess, throughout the book. I feel like it's a story about connections and opening up.
And I think that's really important because I felt that that was also like something that I picked up very early on. And Ria, I think you set it up really nicely with the idea of Wisteria just isn't quite connecting with others yet. She really introduces herself as someone who hasn't really made any sort of developed relationship, whether it's friendship, association, kinship in any way. And it seems like at the start of the story, she might have found someone who can, you know, or a group that might be able to offer that for her.
I think so. In general, I think she's just searching for this and trying to find where this is, or like who's going to provide this for her.
And I think then it would be really easy to move into one of the first questions that I had. And that's the idea that I always loved it when I was reading as a kid, this comic book that described the idea of heaven and hell in the details. And it showed something kind of sneaky in the shadows. And I feel like the Sprite and the Gardener and the characters in it live in the details. I mean, one of the things that's interesting about Wisteria and her friends, new friends, is that they're there in the garden. They're there hiding between the petals and the leaves. And only if you look closely, only if opportunity presents it, only if perhaps maybe like all mythical things, if you sort of get lucky, if you have that accidental discovery, or they maybe just aren't paying attention and allow themselves to be seen, you can discover this really beautiful world. And a lot of stories have addressed the idea of mythical creatures or different ideas that once existed, and the arrival of man changed it. And they make a point of describing scenarios where humans arrived and magic is pushed to the outskirts or the woods. Your characters instead sort of become invisible. They sort of blend in to everything. They actually become the wonderful creatures keeping things alive, but hiding in those details. Was that a natural choice, just based on concepts already established about mythology, or uh, was there some other process behind putting the characters in this situation and having them exist this way?
I feel like it came about kind of naturally in terms of, in the original concept, it was actually just a single page story. And at that point, it was just Wisteria. She was in the bushes, basically. So this kind of grew out of that. But also, I wanted to explore the idea that when humans take over something, the things that live there usually just have to deal with it. Like when you build a city where there wasn't one before, pigeons, insects, whatever else lived there, they continue living there, but their lives and routines and where they get food, that sort of thing, all changes. But I was also thinking about um, when I grew up, there was like a field behind the house, and sometimes you'd find weird little animals, and so even when nothing was there, you were always thinking that something was there, that you were going to see something exciting or magical.
I love that feeling and description. I grew up in what was at the time like a very small bedroom community, and it got bigger. But when I moved there, I lived in a housing development that on three sides had fields. And every day my sister and I would walk to school, and there was like one where there was a walnut orchard that we could cut through. And over the next 5 to 7 years, you saw each field sort of disappear and get developed. But before that, there was always that wonderful sort of mystery. Like I loved running through a walnut orchard, especially in like September, October, because we'd have really big fog move in. And it was sort of mythical feeling, the idea that some of my favorite stories where you walk into a fog in one place and you come out somewhere else. So I love that idea, and it connects with something I remember as a kid, sort of looking for where there is myth or magic maybe hidden somewhere, or if I somehow wonderfully stumbled into it. Joe, I was curious about your thoughts as well.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I think Ree really yeah, put it very well. Um, I think also just I think I like the idea of humans coming and magic leaving in a sort of more passive way rather than like humans actively like stomping out the magic or whatever. So it's just sort of like the the ending of like the sprites handling all the plants just sort of happens in the background without much fanfare.
I do enjoy that. I mean, it feels as though there was less of a destructive feeling when the humans arrived, and more of just an adaptation on the part
Right.
of those who'd been there before. Yeah.
Right.
Um, I know that that sort of touches on the original idea. Can you tell me more about any of the other ideas that came about with the Sprite Gardener as they connect to this, or that also were sort of part of forming this story and its structure? I mean, because I was caught up by the fact that when I was glancing through the bios, you're both illustrators. Ree, you're an illustrator. Joe, in the bio, it describes you more as a comic artist. So you're both coming at this with a very visual approach, I would imagine, but you're also collaborating on this story together. And in that process, I was curious just how else you structured this world, and if there were any other factors that you knew were going to be foundational, I guess might be the best word.
I feel like the largely between the two of us, we started with the visuals really. We had this like what we wanted to portray, a lot of lush nature, these magical little beings, that kind of thing. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to word all of this.
That's okay. Take your time. I'm also well aware of the fact that this whole point of the conversations I have are about storytelling and about art and craft. And that's not always easy to describe.
Yeah.
You can write something down, you can create something, and afterwards someone's like, so how'd that happen? And you're like, oh, you want me to talk about it? And that can get really difficult. I mean, at least for me, sometimes I'm like, well, it felt really good and I liked it. I guess I'm intrigued maybe to help. You say this started out as a one-page idea, and I was wondering maybe how it expounded from that. Were there already some of those foundations already in that one page, or did they grow from ideas? Or maybe that's a helpful starting point. I'm not sure. I could have just made it completely worse.
No, no, it's okay. Um, the original page actually, it doesn't lay very much of this out at all. The original page is just about this sprite that lives in a garden, and the garden is thriving because of her. And the reason that she's doing this is because she likes to see how it makes the gardener feel, and she likes to see the gardener smile, essentially. But beyond that, we pretty much built it from the ground up once we started working together.
Well, I really like that idea. Joe, anything to add on that? I never want to sort of like feel like that's the one answer and then slide through thinking I've got another question, because sometimes if I sit for just a minute, who knows what might happen.
Oh no, I get you. I feel like Ree's definitely more the person to answer those questions because like I feel like she was sort of the person who I guess like birthed the idea like with that one page comic. And so yeah, um I feel like she has a better perspective on that.
Well, in that case, let me try and be aware of that. And instead of looking at a list of questions, start from this point and ask, how is it that this story came from one page, turned into this beautiful graphic novel I was really grateful to enjoy? And maybe how the both of you ended up collaborating on it and turning it into the larger book. Maybe can you describe sort of how you either, did you guys already know each other before this project started?
Oh yeah, yeah, we did. We went to college together and sort of met there, and um, we just sort of just found out we both liked making fan art and stuff. And I feel like over time we would just kind of collaborate on just sharing ideas and just drawing together. And yeah, I guess Ree, if you want to talk about like when you got the email about maybe like pursuing a graphic novel and stuff.
Yeah, I had actually worked with Oni Press before on some really short bonus comics in the back of some floppies, but from there I was asked if I wanted to pitch anything original. And at the time, I didn't really have very many ideas. And this was one that I kind of had just there on the back burner that I thought would be worth exploring. And I remember my fear with it was that I tend to get a little too precious about things. And so I thought that bringing Joe in, who he's a little funnier. He's a lot better at making things immediately engaging, I think. And so I invited him on and they were cool with the idea. So that that's what we did.
That sounds great. I really appreciate that explanation and description for me. It helps. I missed that through the just through the bios and things that you had attended school together and had already done some just sort of hanging out. I mean, it almost sounds like an art jam, like when musicians sit down and just sort of hang out. And it sounds like you had this idea. You'd done some work for Oni. How did that occur that you were able to do that bonus work in the back of the floppies? Was it through a connection or through just pitching or?
I think it was probably I actually think it was Katie Farina. She also worked with Oni for a while, and I think she had recommended me for it.
That's huge. And then the response was, well, would you like to do anything? Which is always a nice sort of bonus follow-up conversation if you've produced work for someone. And the response is, well, did you want to do anything else? I mean,
Yeah, best
it
case
really opens the
scenario.
door, right? Up until this point, Joe, had you also had the chance to, work with any other companies with comic art? Was this sort of an intro for you onto the scene, or what was your history with comics and production before this project?
I guess prior to this, I had mostly just like uploaded just like fan comics to like Tumblr and stuff. But I had worked with there was an anthology called Sweaty Palms, and it was like a anthology about like making autobio comics about like anxiety and stuff. And I was lucky to work with them for a little bit, or just for like the one anthology. And then I think I did like various like small time things just with different like anthologies and zines and stuff. So nothing huge. So Oni doing Sprite and the Gardener with Oni was my first, like, I guess, foray into big comics.
I understand. And then what was the timeline like from when you brought this idea before Oni and Rii? I think you brought up something really great, which I can connect to, which is sometimes there's something that I've created where I would think about doing more with it, but I'm also very aware of how just good it is the way it is. Um, and then what do I want to do with it afterwards, or bringing it to the attention of someone else? Once you've brought this to Oni and brought Joe on, and Oni gives you the green light, did you have a time frame that you had to execute things in? Was there a guaranteed deadline, or was this a project that you had a little bit more freedom with and lacks deliverable?
There was actually a surprising amount of freedom, I guess, because um, I don't know if it was just because it was a shorter book or what, but I feel like this has been in the making for a couple of years now. And also, things got a little weird in the middle because at the time we were working on this, Oni and Lion Forge actually went through a merger. And so things got a little scattered for a while during that. Um, but really, they were very willing to work with me on a lot of fronts.
Wow, that's really wonderful, and great to hear. And I am actually aware I was associated with another company that was working with Oni and Lion Forge maybe about a year and a half ago. And at the time, that was a big part of the discussion, was the idea behind um, there's been a merger, and that meant certain things that had been in the works prior were sort of in flux, and that created just some differentiations between what had been going on to how things were running, and who do you talk to and where do you go if you have questions and things like that. But it sounds like the freedom was just a benefit no matter what was going on with that merger or other factors. You had the time, and you said it was a couple of years. Could you frame what was that, roughly 2 to 3, or?
I'm I'm trying to remember. I feel like from maybe about 2 years. Joe, do you know? I feel like at this point, it feels like it's been going on for 10 years. So,
Well, the last
Yeah,
year is like dog years, so that's okay
yeah.
for everybody.
but yeah, I want to say we probably started writing it around maybe like early 2019. Like we started like seriously scripting, maybe 2019 or 2018.
Okay. I mean, I think that's helpful for, people to keep in mind too. I have a friend a classmate I'm gonna talk with soon, who recently published a book, and she points out in almost every discussion I've been reading up about it, it took her 10 years to write the book, and that's something that really sticks with her. But I think when you're working on something you really care about, there's the time that it's taking, and there's also the time you're taking to get it done right. And if you want to do it the way you want to execute it, uh, sort of time starts becoming as much of a factor when it's about getting it right. Or am I pretty close on that one?
I think so. But
Hmm.
I think also part of it was I think just a lot was going on because I was actually working on art for it when the whole COVID thing hit. And so that also slowed things down significantly. really it was in flux a lot throughout its lifespan.
Understood. Understood. Well, moving back into the story of the sprites and Wisteria, uh, you brought her into being in one page, and then brought Joe on when it was time to expand it. Were you already working before Joe came into the picture and was officially on the project on who Wisteria could potentially be beyond uh, the character who's looking also for a connection with people like her, but also starts to first develop a connection with the humans, which she's taught to sort of hide and avoid. Was there a lot about her that need to be discovered before you started working with Joe, or maybe after Joe joined on and you guys were talking about what this story will end up being about?
It was mostly after Joe came on.
Okay.
I really just invited Joe. Basically, I got the email from Oni and I thought about it and decided I probably needed help with this. So I went ahead and asked them if it would be okay to have a co-writer. And from then just went ahead and invited Joe on.
And I think one of the things that I really sort of was immediately attracted to about this story is that the setting for me started to raise questions, like if there was any foundation in reality. A lot of times it can be fun to recall. I moved around a little bit when we were younger, and between those different locations, there are ideas that I might have for a story that they fit better in one of those places I lived, maybe than compared to where I'm currently living. Meadow Green, for example, is a lovely play on words. It works very well with the story because it also, has an irony to it. And then it starts to, at some point, through the help of Wisteria, take on more of an appearance that associates it with its name. Was there any basis that was used for creating this world, or did it purely spring from imagination? And I'd love to hear both your thoughts.
Meadow Green is the name, at least. That's actually a street we used to live on. It was a pretty
That's
cute
awesome.
neighborhood. Yeah, yeah, it was. I love that name. Um, and so it was a nice little neighborhood. And in the beginning, I think we kind of had these grand expectations. And I thought I'd have this big garden and everything. But the house we were renting wasn't super ideal. And we moved after a year. And none of that ever really came to fruition.
That's going to happen sometimes.
Yeah.
uh,
So I
Joe?
was, oh,
Oh, sorry,
sorry.
Reed,
Oh,
keep
no, no,
going.
no. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to just say, Joe, anything to chime in there?
Oh yeah, I was just like like it seemed so good when we got that house, but it was just very creepy. There was like I think there was a hole in the roof or something. Somehow I'm pretty sure at some point in our time there, like a raccoon got in the roof, and like I know that yeah, and the AC went out, the
I love
water
that there's some
broke.
vagary about that. We think there was was there a raccoon? There was a raccoon,
We
right?
don't know.
There was a lot going on, but there might have been a raccoon.
There was probably a raccoon.
And there were like these kids that we live in Alabama, so like there were these kids that had like a four-wheeler and they looked like they were 8 or something, and they were just like driving around the neighborhood, and I don't know, it was a wild time.
So
That's pretty. Go ahead, Reese.
I was just gonna say, and so I think to some extent, I wanted to give Meadow Green, I wanted to see that dream come to fruition.
I
So
love that. I mean, I have to ask though, since I didn't see it in the book, and this is not a spoiler, okay? So don't anybody listening get weird with me. But I didn't see the four-wheeler. Was there an attempt at any part to consider including it, and the kids sort of driving around the neighborhood and just have it be this? Yeah, sorry, I couldn't hear you. It's those kids on that four-wheeler riding by again. Sorry, what were you saying, Wisteria?
Oh, that
I
would have
mean,
been
I
a
think
good
we should
idea.
have.
Yeah, maybe in
There's
the
Right.
always the
sequel.
potential for a sequel,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, the sequel where maybe the sprites also get a four-wheeler.
Yeah, yeah.
That's awesome. And I need no credit for that, by the way. That's just me feeding the fire.
Oh, you'll
Like,
get the special thanks, don't worry.
That's pretty well. Hey, who knows what's going to come out of a conversation?
Yeah.
But I love that detail. The idea of one the raccoon, but then it was like, and then there's these kids on the four-wheeler. Is that like a constant? Like when there's that neighbor who always runs the lawnmower at the same time every week, and it's just sort of like the soundtrack of that part of the day, or were they just sort of random, where you could 10 a.m., 9:30 p.m. that thing's running?
Oh, they kept you on your toes.
Yeah, it was random.
I think it was mostly I had come up with the concept. Largely the details and the writing came down to both of us. He actually made a bunch of the characters.
Oh yeah, like all the sprites that weren't Wisteria. I had like done preliminary designs for them, but then Rii went and kind of finessed them.
Nice. Okay. So I feel like we had a question right before you stepped away, and I just wanted to make sure. Did it feel like anything got interrupted there at all, or that we had sort of covered anything about that question before we move into the next one?
I feel like we had mostly covered it.
Okay, wonderful. So one of the things that I really enjoyed is that we've got Wisteria, but on the other side, giving us a different perspective, we also get introduced to Elena. And I was wondering where you could tell me about where Elena came from, how she was introduced to the story, because I like the concept. You start with the sprites, but you also need to give them a framing of what the rest of the world's like. And Elena offers that, and also gives us another take on why Meadow Green isn't actually able to live up to its name right now.
Elena was actually she changed a lot from the concept, largely because in the concept she wasn't really much of a character. I feel like in the beginning it was mostly about Wisteria and what she was doing and why she was doing it, but Elena was kind of mysterious. And so along the way, the question kind of came up, well, like, what does the gardener want? She never had a say in this. And is this what she wanted? And that's basically where she came from.
Answer to a question. I like that. Well, okay, what does the gardener think? Well, we should probably get that in there. And I love her story. Elena's got a reason for being there. She's got a reason why she's trying to put some effort, and actually, until Wisteria shows up, not very successful at gardening. Did that sort of come from what you were describing before, how when you guys were talking about Meadow Green, it was this place that there are things you would have loved to have done to it? And did she give you an opportunity to sort of express not only what it's like before Wisteria arrives, but then what it's like when she can start lending a hand?
In some ways, I think so. Um, I'm not sure how Joe feels about that, but do you think it's
Yeah, I feel like it is that, but then also I think for me when I was considering Elena's character, I was I guess relating a lot to her struggle for like trying to, she puts in all this effort, but because she lacks like the years of experience of being a gardener, she can't really bring anything to fruition. And so I feel like that's a huge struggle as a kid, like wanting to do these big things that you can see in your head and it's possible, but it's just like you can't really bring it there.
You haven't had the experience of working through that process, or even getting close and then learning what it is that you need to do differently in order to actually get there. I guess the experience that you were describing earlier, right? Sounds like was
Right.
the biggest factor. But then we do get the arrival of Wisteria, who offers that. And I was intrigued by something that Joe, you kind of brought up earlier, and I'd love to go back just to a little bit, because it also goes into my next question, is the fact that Wisteria doesn't really know why humans and sprites must be kept separate. It's not really something that she can bring into explanation. It's just one of those things that's always sort of been. And I love the idea of leaving it a mystery. It alludes to, how in our own lives there are parts of history that in our day-to-day conversation, if someone asks and it's not something we can immediately recall, it's like, well, why are things like they are? When did that happen? And we have the beauty of the internet. We can go back and look things up and understand that. But sometimes what we're able to recall just from memory is a little bit of a mystery. And was there a conscientious choice about sort of having Wisteria say, yeah, we just know to avoid them, because I love the fact that Joe, you mentioned the idea of the sprites being there, the humans coming in, but it not being a violent transition, that there wasn't any violence. So I don't feel that sense of fear. Like she doesn't have this sense like they're gonna hurt her or bad things will happen if the humans see you. It's just you just don't do it. You know what I mean? It's one of those things you just don't do. So was there any sort of structure or intention, I think, with that decision, or did it just sort of come out of the process naturally?
I feel like it was just a case of like I think we were considering like there's a lot of rules in the world that feel very arbitrary and without reason, and so that was just sort of like another another one of those rules where it's like they just didn't know. I mean, I think Ree had a good perspective on this if you want to chime
Perfect.
in.
Yeah, my thinking was that honestly, maybe there never was a good reason, or that it was so long in the past that everyone had already forgotten. The idea kind of that people do all kinds of things just because that's how it's always been done, even things that are never helpful or good or that are irrelevant at this point. And along the way, they forget that they can reassess that at any time.
I think that's really important because there's just something wonderful about a mystery and getting the chance to, ask the creator, like, hey, what? Tell me more. That's always sort of a fun thing. And I love just a little peek behind the curtain. Like, so what's going on back here? And where's that Wizard of Oz? And, tell me more. I was curious also if you could describe just a little bit for anyone listening and anyone who has read it or will be reading The Sprite and the Garner, what it is, you guys sort of imagine Wisteria and the other sprites can do that allows them to take care of plants in a way that they seem to have forgotten ever since the arrival of humans. They have a gift and they're remembering it. When you were thinking about how it is that they actually can help the garden, is there an idea you had in mind that is being expressed, but it's not always something that they can explain as a, A plus B or 1 + 1 = 2 sort of idea? It's sometimes things that happen can't always be put into very concrete terms, but I was just curious about that idea behind it. Are they giving something, offering something? Do they have something that they share as part of a um, relationship with the plants that they're doing when they're helping?
I was feeling like it was kind of a natural give and take where you live within this environment, and so you take care of this environment because you need it to. And so I was thinking in terms of what they can do is kind of your general what anybody would do in a garden, watering, fertilizing, insect stuff, maybe like seed dispersal, pollination, that kind of thing. But I guess just that since they hadn't done it in so long, it kind of slips their mind how to really do this, or more so, they just don't see any reason to continue doing it if things seem like they're coming along well enough to get by.
Okay, I understand. Joe, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we pretty much covered all our bases with the powers and stuff. I was I guess just like imagining that since they lived in such harmony with nature that they could like get it to bend to their whim and stuff, and just like encourage growth and mend torn leaves and stuff. I
Okay,
think in
yeah.
general there was just a visual Ree had drawn of like before we were even making the comic of like Wisteria moving like droplets of water around, and I just thought that was just a very neat image.
I agree. And I like the idea because I felt like there was a coaxing process, but I wasn't sure if it fell into which Ree, I think you described really well, the idea of pollination, you know, the idea of a sharing seed dispersal, and also this idea of uh, you know, is there something that's exchanged between these sprites and um, vegetation or flora, where it's almost like an energy exchange. And I was really interested about that, but I knew that if I came in just assuming like, so it appears that it's this, I could really wind up just really not looking like I know what I'm talking about. And I also think until I've talked to a creator, I'm still guessing. You know, I'm still, because I know that there's a certain amount of it that, depending on the purpose of the story, isn't described for its own specific. I'm going to go ahead and hit record again, so it'll pick this up. And when it dropped off, we were just talking about the idea of there being an exchange, that there's a, you know, a symbiosis between the garden and those who live there and for so long were taking care of it, and that's how they're able to help the garden, which is something that Elena really needs right now, which is some help. And I love the fact that, you know, one of the things that really stuck with me was how quickly Elena is able to come to grips with the fact that she's actually not the one who's making the garden perform better. And she accepts it really quickly. And I wondered if that had anything to do with something that you'd already decided about the character understanding. Did it develop while you were writing the story? That was just for the pacing and story structure, that it was sort of better for her to grasp it early, or was it maybe more about the idea, if she's doing this for her mom, then any help that's going to improve that uh, opportunity to make this right the way she wants to is good in her eyes?
It did develop as the story went on. In the beginning, we didn't really have any idea who Elena was. And so once we hit that point, part of it was the fact that the book was going to be very short. We didn't have a lot of time to just wander around. But I also think that in general, kids are pretty quick to accept things. How she responds afterward is she's obviously upset about it. But I think ultimately she realized that what she wanted to accomplish would come about more easily with some help, even though up until this point she seemed to be pretty confident that she could take care of this all on her own.
I think kids are pretty understanding and they adapt rather quickly. And I think once you realize that you can do what you want with the help of someone who's not trying to do it for any other reason than that they simply want to help and they have the help they can offer, it can be really easy to say, well, then we're doing this together and it's great to have help. I felt like that came through really clearly. I just love the fact that it felt for me like she understood what was going on, and it was difficult because she really wanted to be the one who could do this. But now she can still do it. She's just getting help she didn't know about. And now that she knows about it, well, we have an opportunity to develop their relationship. But then also we have this tension, which is created because Wisteria, well, she has to consider what this could mean for her new friends that she's forming and what they might feel about her letting herself be seen by a person and then even revealing what she is and what she can do. Which I think is great because we get a chance now to move into some of these really fun characters who I really enjoyed. I was wondering if you could start off by telling me about the character of Moss, where Moss came from, and some key elements for those who might be, thinking about reading it or reading the story and felt like they had an idea, but would love to know how close they are to being right about who Moss is and what the story brings about through her.
Moss is cool. I just want to say that right now. She's my favorite character. And I think she's sort of like, she only has the one eye that shows through her hair, and she's like smaller. So I feel like that kind of gives the impression that she's shy. But I think also the way she composes herself is that like it's less that she's shy and more she just doesn't have a lot to say. But when she does have something to say, like everyone tends to listen. And so I think she sort of has like a subdued confidence. And I think Rii had some good points about Moss as well.
I think in general, she doesn't stand out. She's very observant, but you might not know that. So I imagine she's the one who maybe best understands situations and others, even if she doesn't give a lot of outward indication of that.
Oh, I
Felt
did
like
want to
she,
say,
yeah,
or
go
you go,
ahead.
you go. Oh,
I just felt like
okay,
you
okay.
you really nailed something with the idea of her having a great presence, and I felt that that was then justified through your descriptions. She's observant, she knows what's going on. She doesn't have to speak every time in order to have an impact when she does actually speak. Sorry, Joe, you were saying that.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to bring up in my original design, she was sort of she would have like red bugs in her hair because she was based on, or I guess like when I was imagining her, it was sort of like Spanish moss. And so her hair was kind of like a little messier, and she had these like spirally glasses. And but I feel like after thinking about it for a little bit, it was just like it'd be kind of weird for the sprites to have glasses, so we just had to like I feel like we just came to the agreement like she can do without the glasses.
Okay.
She definitely was one of the stranger designs, I think.
Yeah.
Did she go through a lot of changes and revisions, or did it only take one or two decisions to sort of
I feel
get
like
her down?
I actually feel like she's still pretty similar, glasses aside. She still doesn't look quite as like prim and flowery as the others.
Nice description. Flowery. I agree. Well, then let me also then move into Mimosa and Amaranth. Am I saying Amaranth correctly?
I think so, Amaranth. Yeah, it's a weird
Okay.
one.
I did my best to wrap my mouth around it correctly and try and spit it out there. Tell us about Mimosa and Amaranth. How would you describe them to someone?
I imagine Amaranth is kind of like your cool older sister who lets you watch PG-13 movies. And I think Mimosa is probably similar in that she's probably pretty open about what she thinks and what she wants, but I imagine she'd be a little sweeter. We don't really get to see much of her, really.
Yes, but for the moments when she's on, she caught my attention, and if nothing else, made me wonder. I wonder what else we might learn about Mimosa, maybe in the sequel. Joe, anything to add on that for either Mimosa or Amaranth?
I did want to chime in about Mimosa. I remember when I was like checking over like Rii's pencils, and I saw Mimosa pop up, and I was like, wait, like because Mimosa only shows up, she's probably in like 3 pages, but she has a very striking design. And I was thinking, like, why isn't she a part of the main cast? Like, she's so cool. But so here's hoping Mimosa gets to make a bigger splash in the sequel. But
the backstory.
but I do agree with Rii that like Amaranth is like the cooler one. She mentioned that she is like the older sister, but I feel like for me, like Amaranth and Nettle, the other taller fairy in the group, were kind of like the cool rich aunts that don't have any kids that like buy you a bunch of presents. Like they felt like the moms of the group, I guess.
Understood. And I did like that description, the cool older aunt and the cool older sister. Those are both really good ones. But yes, she is very cool. And, definitely seems like the type that would let you watch a PG-13 movie, even when you're still only like, 10 or 11. Especially if it's one that, it's not so much about the scare, it's just about the thrill of getting to do something you're not supposed to because someone cool was like, hey, man, I know how it is. Let me help you out. Like,
yeah. Like your favorite babysitter lets you stay up late.
Genius. Oh, man. Yeah, it takes me back to, that was always cool. When you had the good one and you were like, oh, this is going to be a fun night. This is going to be cool. Like, mom and dad, you guys can go out to dinner anytime you want.
Yeah, go on. Go.
Right. Yeah. Date night rocks. Okay. So, and then also, let me just ask about Hortensia. Am I saying that one correctly?
Yes.
It's always a question. When I'm pronouncing names or I mean, I'm one of the, I'll just go ahead and admit it. Through a good chunk of my life, I have a problem with Greenwich because I read it as Greenwich as a child. And as far as I'm concerned, it's Greenwich because that's how it looks and spells. And on too many occasions, I'll want to say a word the way my brain reads it, but that's not always how it should be pronounced. So sometimes I'll go, did I say that correctly? Because that's how I wanted to say it. That doesn't mean it's the right way to say it. But Hortensia, who I thought was a very bright character. I was wondering what you could tell folks about her. Just give her a brief description for us.
Just want to say that's the first time I've heard that said out loud. I also thought it was Greenwich. But Hortensia is she's actually named after hydrangeas, and so most of the sprites really were just based on my own impressions of the plants that they're named after. My parents grew a lot of plants when I was growing up, and so I feel like I have these very specific images of them in my mind, and that's kind of where Hortensia came from. Hydrangeas, they're very summery, they're very bright, they're kind of playful, they're kind of bouncy. So I wanted to translate that into a character.
Awesome. Joe, any thoughts on any of the characters, including Hortensia, as we go through?
I do want to jump in and say never heard Greenwich pronounced Greenwich. So that's a new one for me. But yeah, Hortensia was just spherical and friendly, like with the shape of the hydrangeas and everything.
Wow, you guys are making me feel so good about Greenwich. Because I'd see I remember reading as a kid, and I remember reading about different things, and I remember one of the big things that seemed to be a voice for art and community was the village voice. And I'm like, well, what village? And it was like Greenwich. So later I'm visiting and they're like, no, dude, everyone says Greenwich. It's just the way it is. It's like, there's also a street in New York it's spelled Houston, which I think of Houston, Texas, but it's pronounced Houston. And apparently you can really identify yourself as not being from there if you say Houston instead of Houston Street. And it's
I would have
it's a learning curve.
I never would have guessed.
Mm-mm.
Okay, to be fair, also, if it makes you feel any better, I have a tendency to just say words the way I say them until someone stops me. And so right before this, I actually I went ahead and Googled how to say amaranth just to make sure I did not have a recording of me saying amaranth incorrectly for the whole internet.
See, I had a feeling this would be a good conversation, and now it's just been confirmed. That's just icing on the cake. That's all.
I just really wanted to make sure.
Well, it also, because in comics, sometimes I come across names where you would think it's pronounced one way, and then you hear it and you're going, That's the exact opposite of the okay. Well,
Yeah.
okay. And it's been a process. So here's the thing that I love as I'm laughing and grateful and love the fact that you went and looked it up so that you could pronounce it, because sometimes I don't and I'm about to say something and I go, I really should have looked that up. Oh boy, open mouth, here goes. Um, were any of these characters also inspired by anyone either of you knew or know? And you sort of like could use that as a, for example, are you guys familiar with a comic artist who kind of does a painting style called Alex Ross?
I feel like
I'm
I've heard the name.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
He tries to capture real life. So if you look at a comic book and you see Superman or Captain America, they look very cartoonish to a degree. And he turns around and finds real life models, either actors or real people he knows, and he'll have them pose and then try and draw them realistically. And sometimes he'll open, the curtain and say, "Here, look, these are all the life, real people that I use as stand-ins for different characters that are kind of iconic." But he wanted to ground them to someone realistic. So I was curious with any of these characters if there was a person, either one or both of you knew, that was a great reference point when you were, thinking about this character, creating any of these characters, or bringing them to life on the page. Is that a good way of trying to set that up?
I think so. Um, I can't really think of any specific people though. I really feel like most of it came from just general inspiration from the plants themselves.
Wonderful. When you were describing, how for example, hortensia and the idea of the hydrangea. I love the idea of connecting it to the plant, and I just wanted to pose the question as to whether or not there was anything on the person human side. Sometimes um, there are things that can really connect when we're looking for like, well, who is this similar to? Well, how would they respond to something? And then you can sort of figure out how to fold it in. But I love the idea that it sounds like so much of it was based on the personalities of these flowers.
I did want to say, in the very rough preliminary stages of Elena's mom, I think we were like rewatching Seinfeld at the time, and so I was imagining Elena's mom as like kind of looking like Elaine, but I feel like in the final version of Elena's mom doesn't really resemble that, but like somewhere deep in her DNA, there's like a strand of Elaine from Seinfeld.
I love that. So the fun thing also is that while we're enjoying these characters and getting to watch them all, we get two different reflections from Elena when she's chatting with her friend from the other side of the fence, working with the sprites. And there's a moment when we get a chance to sort of see her recalling all of those times that she was uh, walking through the garden with her mom as a child and reliving all these wonderful moments. I was curious about the development of that. Is that something that you knew at some point you wanted to have her reflect back on how she was bringing something to life that she remembers as a child? Or did it happen in some other way that perhaps I'm not even close to?
Is this I guess kind of in reference to maybe like the rock that she has in the garden where
Correct.
it has like toward the end it has the image of her and her mom on it. That was actually I think the idea of a decorative rock was actually proposed by Ari, who was the one who picked up the book, the editor, I mean. I think it was a detail that she just kind of thrown out, like, oh, what if she just had some kind of personalized item in the garden to show that it was hers? And from there, it turned into that stone that features a picture of her and her mom. And I think that was really what jump started this idea of the garden being something that was created both by her and with her mother that has these sorts of memories associated with it and that she wants to bring back to life even though her mom isn't around as much.
Anything to add on that, Joe?
I guess I just wanted to bring up that like I feel like there was kind of like it almost happened accidentally, but I think reflecting on the question and then just kind of like looking back at the book, the absence of Elena's mom is kind of felt by everybody in the book. Like even the sprites at the very beginning are sort of like mentioning how bad the garden is now that that gardener at the house like isn't tending to the plants, and so like it's sort of a character that isn't there at until the very end of the book, but all the characters kind of like know of them to some degree.
I'm actually really glad you brought it up in that way because my next question is that one of my favorite elements in the story is the impact that we see on Elena's mother, who hasn't been in much of the story, but yet I felt it was captured so well just in that short arrival and appearance. And I was wondering, was it difficult to capture the importance of her appearance in such a really what I felt like a short series of panels that was also so equally powerful and poignant?
It is really strange. However, the course of the book, I feel like her mom is very present in her non-presence, where almost her, like the fact that she isn't there is kind of its own character. And so getting to the point where she appears, it was a little difficult. I think I was afraid that we'd get there and readers would be like, "Oh, who is this and why is she here?" Because she doesn't show up until the very end and it's very brief. But I feel like through building up the idea of her absence being so impactful that it was a little easier to introduce her and then have her appearance be equally as impactful.
Joe, any
Um,
thoughts on that, my friend?
I mean, I'm right there with you where you were saying it was a powerful experience. Like, I want to say Rii was mostly in charge of thumbnailing out those last couple pages where um, Elena's mom shows up, and yeah, I feel like it's a very beautiful sequence. I think Rii was really flexing her comic muscles there.
I love the fact that you point out that in this moment, which I felt was really important, that there was some difficulty involved, and I really like the fact that it's something that anybody who's working on a project, they almost want to hear from somebody else that it can be hard sometimes because what you want to do seems like it should be so straightforward, and then there's the actual execution of it, which can seem so difficult. And it sounds like you know there was a challenge here, but it was one that you were able to work through. And I think it's as Joe put it, better than I can paraphrase, a really lovely sequence. And I thought it worked out so well. It sounds to me like there was a lot of work and there was a challenge, but it also sounds like it was worth it. Would I be right on that one?
It was definitely a challenge. I think whenever you're writing a story, in your head, you're thinking, I want A, B, and C to happen. But what you're not thinking about until you really sit down to work on it is that you need to figure out a way to connect these things. And that's the hard part.
Yeah, I'm reminded of the time when I'll remember that it. So I remember like workshop classes for fiction where someone would talk about how, they want the character to get out of the car and go inside or cross the street. And how on occasion, sometimes the teacher would just have to come in and say, okay, well, then you just write a sentence. So and so got out of the car and walked across the street. And, they're describing what's a really simple approach. But then later they're saying, because we want to make that part easy, because the part that you're going to get to that's much harder is going to require that much more work and effort. And it was always this idea of like, you recognize where it is you should be putting the effort in because of the importance behind it. And it's going to be a challenge, but don't try and put that work and effort into the parts where you don't have to, because you're going to need that later. And when you really need it, you don't want to find out you exhausted a lot of imagination on other parts when you can really use it. And I felt like there was a wonderful use of imagination in that sequence. And I thought Elena's mom, who hadn't been there, made such an appearance and such an impact that I made the connection really quickly in the story. And for me, it was a really wonderful scene. I felt what Elena had been working towards the moment I saw the delight that she and her mom got to share. So I thought it was a wonderful execution. And I thought, how do you pull something like that off? Because it
I'm
doesn't
really
look
glad you liked
easy.
it.
Oh, my pleasure. I think there's moments when you try and picture how you would try and do that, and when you realize you have absolutely no clue, that you start looking at how someone else did it. You're like, how did they do that? Come on now.
And
Because
honestly, I think if you asked me to do it again, I wouldn't know what I did.
see, now that's like every once in a while I'll do a trick shot or, write something down, or afterwards I've had that experience where I'm like, yeah, I can't do that twice. I I just can't. That was but I love the way it came out. I think it was a beautiful description. And one of the things that I love about that moment and hearing you describe it is that it also brings up for me what it must be like over the process of, you know, having this idea as a beginning, working with it together, and bringing it to Oni as what you're going to be working on, compared to what it's like when you've actually like finished and published and you've got it in your hands. Now, Joe, you'd alluded at one point to a process of, finessing and sort of like trying to come in and apply a process to what you guys were doing. How did that come into play with your collaborating? And then also just tell me what it was like when all that collaboration was done and you guys could see, some of the finished work in your hands, either proofs or, the bound book.
I guess a lot of the collaboration was I feel like, especially like laying the groundwork, we would just like go to a Barnes and Noble and like sit in like the like cafe area for a handful of hours with a rough script, and we would kind of go through it with a red pen, and we would each be like writing stuff down and sort of like figuring out like questions that we needed to ask, anything that sounded weird. And I feel like it was just a lot of I mean, it's like you said, where it's like you want A, B, and C to happen, and you just need to like figure out how that can happen and make sure all the impactful moments are standing out, and you know but also make sure the unimportant parts are still I guess like enjoyable enough. I feel like a lot of it is just a matter of considering how music is kind of like equal parts sound and silence, where you have to know uh, which parts are going to shine, like which parts to flex the artistic muscles on. And um, I don't know, Reed, you have any insight on this?
Collaboration wise, I really just liked that there were so many things that I don't think would have been included in this book if we had not been working on this together. Kind of a nice little parallel, I guess, to what happens in the book. All that um, you can make something better with others than you could maybe make by yourself. But
Awesome.
I keep thinking back to Joe was very, very determined to get in the sequence with the worm. I would not have thought
Aw.
up the worm, but he really wanted that worm. And I think that's what I think about anytime I think about this collaboration is there are so many points in this story that I don't think it would have been the same book.
Joe,
There was
could you maybe explain a little bit for folks who haven't read the book yet what we're talking about with the worm?
Oh yeah, yeah. I can give you the whole shebang about the worm.
Hidden
There was
caboodle? Let's get it.
Yeah.
oh yeah. Um, so like I just remember there was this scene where Rii was talking about it, and it's like, okay, Wisteria needs to be coming back from the gardener's house, and she needs to be excited about like telling her friends something new, but then like is kind of immediately shut out by some outside force. And I feel like there's a lot of times in my head where it's like, okay, first draft is always going to be best draft, and like the first thought that came in my head, like, okay, like what if a worm was just like there, and I just wanted like the worm to kind of disrupt things. And in the rough draft of this story, like the worm was going to be a bigger character, and like it was going to like learn tricks, and like I think it's at some point there was going to be like a second worm. And in the very end, when they're all working in the garden, there's going to be this like 2-page spread of like a bunch of sprites all like airlifting this big worm into the garden. I don't know. I don't know what I was going through then, but I was just like, no, worms are going to be great in this book. Maybe you know, a director's cut will come out. We can have all those worm sequences in there.
The worm cut.
Yeah.
Well, because it sounds like, yeah, you know, I mean, you know, we've had the Snyder cut recently. It sounds like the worm cut, you know, just a lot was left on the cutting room floor. Was
Yeah.
there a colony of worms, a family? Were they a tribe? How did, you know, did they?
I mean, that would definitely be explored in the sequel. Like, you got to leave some questions.
This sequel's going to be awesome.
Yeah, you have to leave mysteries.
Do you have a working title for the sequel, by the way?
Oh, we actually haven't.
No pressure.
We actually haven't thought about a sequel just yet. We've been kind of playing through some ideas of like actually creating something else, but maybe sometime in the future we'll get to come back to this.
That's awesome.
And bring the worms.
Yeah. And you know what? You got to bring the worms if you're going to do a sequel. That should be like a mantra now. Dude, you're going to bring a sequel? You got to bring the worms. Hey, I was curious, you know, was there one character or concept within the story development that changed the most, whether design, concept, anything else, where you saw the most dramatic or substantial change from originally? Because we were talking about Moss and, you know, the red flecks and the glasses. Was there anyone else who went through a process of change, or was there one who went through the most, or did we already cover it with Moss?
I think it was definitely Elena. And the initial concept, she was actually a young adult, and it was only that one page, but I feel like Wisteria still more or less stayed the same in a lot of ways, but Elena was kind of a mystery. She didn't seem very rambunctious. You don't really learn much about her.
But she went through, you know, this process where you were sort of like working her, you know, development through the story, and also maybe sort of discovering things when you would have exchanges with her in Wisteria.
Yeah, I definitely think having her, because on the one page story, it ends pretty, obviously it's one page, not a whole lot happens on it, but you never actually see a real interaction between the two. And so I think having more of that kind of brought her character out. And also, as Joe pointed out at some point to me, we also made her worse at gardening, but Wisteria, I think, stayed more or less the same.
Okay. So that was about the majority of like the questions I had scripted, written down. But I'm also aware of the fact that as good as I try to be, as much as I try and do, there's always a chance I'm going to miss something. And so my favorite sort of question as we get towards like, you know, the end of a conversation, or as I've worked through all the questions that I came up with, is to turn around and say, what did I miss? You know, more importantly, is there a question you would have liked to hear me ask that you've already got the answer ready for, and you're like, oh, if they ask this question, I've got an answer, but then I didn't ask the question, which means either one of two things happen. We end the interview and I never ask the question and we never get your answer. Or I give you the opportunity to say, you know what I'd love for you to know about? It's not something you asked, but this is something I'd love for you and anyone listening to know about this story. Who wants to take first swing at that idea?
I feel like you asked like all the right questions, because I definitely, like, going into this, I didn't know any of the answers to these questions. So like I definitely had to like sit down and think for a good bit. So because yeah, I remember like getting the email and I was like, okay, definitely gonna have to like chew on this for a bit. But so yeah, I can't think of anything other than like, I feel like for future guests on your podcast, you should ask them if their book doesn't have a large surplus of worms, like where's the worms?
I think I'm going to have to start asking that and reference them back to this conversation and be like, whoa, you should really catch up. So Rii and Joe sort of explain this all. You should really
We're
listen to that episode.
kind of on the cutting edge here.
We figured out what the rest of them are still trying to learn. Worms. It's all about the worms. Rii, how about for you? Did I miss a question? Is there a question you had an answer ready for? You're like, he didn't even ask it. Like, and now
I
you have a
can't
chance to.
I can't really think of anything. I'm kind of with Joe in that I feel like honestly, your questions gave me an opportunity to kind of think a little deeper about all of this. I feel like when you're actually making the book, it's it's simultaneously kind of like feverish where you're like just trying to get through it and you're not thinking too hard about anything, but it's also you kind of hit a stride where everything becomes very humdrum and I don't know. It was nice to have this little reflection back on it.
Oh, that's my pleasure. I would love to follow up with you guys in the future on any projects you do and offer the same kind of reflection. Because this was a great conversation for me. It was great talking about your craft, your process. And when you were talking about the idea of it just being like humdrum day to day, I'm always reminded of this concept that when I first discovered it, I loved, and I still love it. The Taoist approach of the Wu Wei concept to be without being, to do without doing. And I feel like when you get into a project at some point, you're so busy doing it, you're not thinking about doing it. When my teacher in a religion class asked me to describe it once, I was like, oh, Wu Wei is like brushing your teeth. You don't think about wetting the brush or putting the toothpaste on. You just wet the brush, get the toothpaste, brush the teeth, spit, you're done. And I think sometimes when you're in a project, once you've gotten to the point of what you're doing, and now it's just a process of executing it on whatever your routine is, you're just doing it. You're not thinking about doing it because, well, thinking is not going to help you get it done. You just got to get it done.
You really can't think too hard about it. You have to kind of try to just get into the routine of things.
That sounds like it was really valuable. And from what I saw, you guys had a really, it appears to me through the story, a great rhythm. And I thought that came across so well in the story. I think others might feel the same way. And I'm just curious, are there any ways out there that you guys communicate with others that you would be okay with sharing? Some enjoy social media platforms, some like you to go to their website and fill out a form. But if there's a way that someone wanted to say, hey, Joe, hey, Rii, I want to talk to you more about your book. And is it possible that I could? Is there a platform you'd like to let anyone know about today where they could find you, reach you, talk to you?
I feel like the easiest way to find me is typically just on Twitter, which is my handle is Rii Abrego. It's just my name without the A in Abrego. But also, I have a contact form on my website, riabrego.com, and I'm always open to hearing from anybody, really, either through that or my email or my Twitter. Um, Either way is really fine with me.
Wonderful. Thank you. Joe, how about you?
And pretty much same here. My on my Twitter, if you just want to contact me there, it's Joe Obligations. That's just the name Joe and then Obligations. And then likewise, if you would prefer emailing, there's my email, joe.obligations@gmail.com. And I'm very open to hearing anything, any thoughts, concerns, questions.
Requests.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I mean, I know that after I read the book and I had the chance to reach out to Tara from over at Oni. Tara, thank you again for introducing me to another great book and creators. I had questions. So I can only imagine after reading the book, hearing this conversation, others are going to have questions as well, because we covered a lot. You guys were so great. You offered so much wonderful insight. It was a lot of fun for me. I was glad that I was able to ask the right questions to get us there. And I honestly think, Joe, when you were like, yeah, I think you answered, you asked all the questions. I was like, hey, gold star.
I mean, you really did. Like, I really feel like I'm walking away from this conversation like knowing a lot more about the book that we wrote. Honestly, like I feel like I understand it to a deeper degree that like I hadn't previously thought about.
Wow. Okay. So see, my job is to compliment you guys and talk about how good you are. So I'm really flattered. I'm very grateful. And that was very gracious of you both to share. I really appreciate it. Thank you both for sitting down with me today, for sharing your story, for talking more about Sprite and the Gardner. It's from Oni Press. Find it, thank me later, and then they just let you know how you can ask both Joe or Rii any questions you might still have. And with that, I'm going to bring our conversation to a close. Thank you both.
Yeah, and thank you for
Yeah.
inviting us.
Yeah, thank you for having us. It's been a treat. It's been a
Yeah.
delight.
It's actually my first podcast. It's very exciting.
That's awesome. I got to be your, that's huge. And that brings us to the end of a great conversation with Joe Whitt and Rii Abrego. I know I still have that great feeling I had the first time we talked. I hope it's the feeling you have as well. If you have any questions or thoughts for me, please don't hesitate to send me a message, leave it in a comment on this video, or reach out to me. I'm all over social media, as is anyone these days, right? And if you want to reach out to Joe or Rii, there's also the notes to check out for all the best ways to get in touch with them and get your hands on a copy of The Sprite and the Gardner. Thanks for checking out this video. I look forward to the next time I get to share another one of these great conversations with you.